So as the dreaded vaccine approaches, just obliged to add my voice to the choir that is already out there, and letting people know that this is very unlikely to be good for you, and if you don't want, a tall dark stranger, putting something in your body in a darkened alley one night, you definitely do not want Bill Gates and his minions, or Pfizer and their minions, or team of Satan's little helpers. You don't want them putting something in your body either. And unlike in the case of a tall dark stranger, in a darkened alley, you know pretty much more or less what you're going to be getting, and it's going to be a natural product. In this case, these people who make these vaccines literally have access to everything almost in the entire universe, including all the bad stuff, to put in these vaccines to then inject into your body. And it's beyond argument and beyond debate. It's just a matter of empirical fact that these same people making these vaccines, or their very close friends in the medical industry, have for decades been injecting people with things that are very, very bad for them. So I think that says enough for anybody, with a very moderate amount of intelligence, that you do not want these vaccines. You don't want really any vaccines or any kind of modern medical intervention, apart from perhaps the absolute necessary, or what you really, really know about. You can make sure it's not going to be bad for you. And so much of it is bad for you that it's rarely worth taking the risk. Yeah, that sums it up very clearly. If anybody is still not totally convinced, and I can help them, perhaps save their life, save their health, or those close to them, and I'm happy to do that. You can connect with me in the comments box, or perhaps on one of my other social media accounts if you are able to find me. but it's really not a matter of debate, in any shape or form. Um, and you should know already, and it's hardly worth anybody wasting their voice to even say it now, because it is so obvious. You've had so much opportunity to see the truth, but still, there is still some slight obligation on those who do know the truth to just add their voice once again to the choir, in the hope that it can prevent, one or two tragedies, um, over the next year. If you want, to be healthy, that is achieved by taking care of yourself over the course of a lifetime. It's achieved by eating the right healthy diet and by keeping a good check on your own energy flow, to make sure it is as powerful as possible. And it's also achieved by building good karma, by doing right by the people around you and encouraging them to take up the right healthy lifestyles a little bit. It's largely a psychological matter, or a matter of what could be called the health of the immune system. And the world in which we live today has enormous amount of stress factors. One of the main ones at the moment being the whole lockdown itself and the hysteria around the so-called virus. And these psychological factors are extremely important in the overall impact on the person's health. And if you want to stay healthy, these are the things you pay attention to. I could go on and on and on. Perhaps I will a little bit, but it should be clear already. But for those who need more coaching, coaxing, just not to have some kind of foreign, businessman, get his needle on your body. Why would you do that when you wouldn't want a tour doc stranger, have his insertions, without investigating him first. That why would you want that? There is these are just it's just very poisonous, chemicals mostly that modern medicine will inject you with and give you, and not good for your health. It tastes like plastic, and you know, they probably do a similar thing to if you eat you know, a plastic, you know, door handle or something like that. This is that's how medical they are. Um, uh, um, um, hmm. You see, do I need to add that those who are injured by the modern medical empire, their witness statements are simply routinely covered up? You know what happened to the scientist who spoke out about vaccines and said they cause autism. You know, he was driven out of his profession and treated like a criminal almost, or actually. Um, and this is what routinely happens to the millions of victims of modern medicine. Not just the scientists who speak out about it, but the patients who are injured. And you let it happen. In the mental health system, millions of people are injected with poison. They are protesting, a lot of them, most of them, a lot of the time, whenever they have a chance to express their opinion. And as a result, already, they are labelled incompetent and insane. And their voice is never heard. Or if it is heard, it's used as an added excuse to say they're insane, slander them, to take them back to hospital, to increase their dosage. There's nothing they can do about it. Because you don't help them, and the people in charge of medicine, they are just making money out of it and covering up their crimes. So, this is not a matter of dispute. It's absolutely 100% empirically proven to anybody who is just willing to good-naturedly use their eyes. And you have to be insane to, you know, be positive or cheerful, you know, about the prospect of more modern medical interventions, such as vaccinations, and you would only accept them under duress. And you should not do that either, because hopefully you will have a choice, and you don't want to inflict poison on yourself out of simple social pressure, peer pressure. So it'd be a very stupid, cowardly thing to do. But also, you also want to take a stand for everybody else as well, and for yourself in future, to resist encroachments, further encroachments of the government and big business in intrusion into your life and into your body. Because when you give that away, you render yourself extremely vulnerable, and based on clear historical evidence, it's going to be very, very bad for your health. And you're just going to get more and more controlled and more injured. There is a reason the symbol on the bottom right hand of this video looks like a bit like a Chinese restaurant, with various symbols, because what is happening is that the world is being turned into a Chinese restaurant, with you are the main meal, if you're even that lucky. Not to be a starter. You know how the Chinese treat animals. You don't do anything about it. And now the restaurant is coming to you. This is the sad truth of the matter. Bill Gates, China, Pfizer. Yep, they are. They're fulfilling the biblical prophecy in Revelation 17. It says that Jesus will eat you. It very clearly says Jesus is going to toss you in a lake of fire, which is his frying pan, in his kitchen, and then he's going to eat you. You have been promised this for 2,000 years. And now we can see it happen. The movement to the factory farming model of humanity. If you look at what has happened to the livestock and the animals in society over the last 100, 200 years, and the kind of conditions they live in, you have allowed this to happen. And what happens when a business is successful? It expands. So you can't say that people didn't warn you. It's in the main book. 2,000 years been central to our society. Very clearly says when the end times come, it's going to be plagues. It's going to be plagues like there are now. Fornication. Well, we've had some of that. That was, a brief holiday and relaxation. But, there's fornication, there's plagues, Whore of Babylon, Scarlet Woman, the Abomination, the dragon, the lamb, the very tender, Welsh lamb, and the second lamb, another lamb, the beast, end times, we're having this, and then then, the glorious triumph, Jesus comes back, he throws everybody in a lake of fire, and then he eats them. And this has been clearly spelled out to you for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now we can see it happening, because this is how life works. You've been doing it to other animals for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's right to do something, but it shouldn't keep getting worse. It should, become more humane over time. This is how life works. It's survival of the fittest. It's Darwinian. You in your life, if you're honest, and if you look at the society around you, we have not given 1 cent of care about the real suffering of other animals or even other human beings, because if you look at all the mental patients I've been talking about, not given 1 cent of care for them. In fact, you encourage the sadism inflicted upon them, the psychic cannibalism on the mental patients, and obviously the real slaughter, murder and devouring of the low organisms. This is the Darwinian world that we live in. Capitalism, yeah. Well, capitalism is great, because if it is real capitalism, and it's just capitalism, because that means that it's just about making money, and it's survival of the fittest, but it's not about killing and murdering and eating. It's just about making money and making more business, and within a certain framework of pacifism, ideally. But capitalism is just within the general Darwinian framework of reality, which is potentially much, much worse, because that goes back to lions and tigers just simply eating, killing and eating their prey, and it's just dog eat dog world, right? Of tearing one another down, and barely surviving, and most don't survive. So this is the universe we live in. This is the world we live in, and those who can take advantage often will take advantage. And if somebody can get into your body and stick a needle in your body, who you don't know, you know nothing about, they can take advantage, and they will take advantage. And it's just the next step, What does the man who has everything want? How can he consolidate his power even more? How can he have the next delicacy, uncharted delicacy, did our politicians and our millionaires and our billionaires and medical, pharmaceutical makers and did all these people need to what do they need to do what they've been doing? Did they need to make millions and billions of dollars at the expense of, you know, child labor, you know, in Africa, for decades, or at the expense of, you know, mental patients being violated against their will, or the animals being tortured to death in tiny little cages all their lives, or keeping the average, you know, worker in society or in McDonald's or in schools, something. Do they need to keep them so very ignorant and so, you know, put upon and with low self-value? Do they need to, you know, pollute all the rivers and the ocean, kill all the fish, and you know, destroy our natural environment? Um, do they need to keep people paralyzed in fear of statistically, you know, irrelevant events like terrorism or, uh, you know, pandemics or um, mental illness or um, you know, the latest, you know, very minor tragedy on the news. Um, they need to work everybody, you know, 12 hours, you know, 12 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week, um, doing something which is, you know, overall probably socially detrimental rather than socially positive, you know, like, you know, working McDonald's or, um, you know, or working in some plant, some factory which is polluting the environment, or making useless items which, um, you know, are just going to detach people from their own nature even more and make them fixated on, you know, things which are not even going to be useful to them once they get them. Um, they need to do the, you know, secret human experimentation, like, you know, the MK Ultra project, um, you know, by the CIA or by, you know, or testing, um, you know, radiation, you know, the effects of radiation on humans, or that kind of thing, or dropping nuclear bombs, you know, in the ocean, um, irradiating villages. Do they need to do this stuff? Um, Did they need to eat, 2 hamburgers instead of one? Did they need, did you need to eat 2 hamburgers instead of one? Did they need to, eat meat, murdered animals, 2 or 3 times a day, 4 times a day, all their lives? They need to amass, enormous mounds, of infinite, material items and luxuries, sometimes elegant cars and things like that. The cost of, like I say, virtual slave labor or injurious labor, on people in third world countries. Do they need to, drop bombs on Iraq? Murder, thousands or millions of Asian people? Did the Chinese need to, murder millions of people in their, their revolution, the communist revolution? Well, mostly, they didn't exactly need to do these things as much as they did do them. But, they did them anyway. And they seem to get away with it pretty well so far. And you let them get away with it. You're part of it. You're complicit in most of it. And that's conquered territory now for them. So they march forward. And what's the next, what's the next arena to conquer? Well, there's technology. There's lots of, injections of fancy new high-tech stuff, which they can do, to enjoy themselves and cement their power even more. So they can turn the whole population to cyborgs, or some strange kind of like, fish human hybrid, biotechnology or something. This is the the march forward into the beautiful progress of of human history. The leftists are so desperate for. Um, um, they just like the Bible says, they just start eating you, and they start um, um, this is what this is called specialization. It's we came from the monkeys, but so told. Because we don't eat the monkeys, but they do in China. and if somebody is prepared to hoard billions and billions and billions of worth of luxury items or power, relatively, if they're willing to hoard all that, and obviously they're also generally immensely intelligent. While somebody is just doing injurious labor still in some third world country like Africa or South America, a child, even a child, or some mental patient is just an extreme, horror their whole lives for making a very little bit of money for the pharmaceutical poison maker, the one who makes the plastic like antipsychotic or antidepressant or benzodiazepine. Their life is worth so little that the doctor is prepared to literally torture them and poison them their whole lives for, about, I don't know, making an extra £15 a week, £20 a week for the pharmaceutical company. The cost of that poor human being, the schizophrenic, the depressed patient, being poisoned and feeling like they're being raped every second of their life. If they're willing to do that, which they have been for years and years and years, they even cut off people's brains, called lobotomy, electroshock therapy. These kind of obviously barbaric treatments, they're just proven to have gone on to exist. And if you understand the situation now and you don't turn a blind eye, you can see that, like what I'm saying, still thousands or millions people are suspended in total hell-like conditions for the sake of making the pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, £15 more a week. Or even £10, maybe even £10 more a week, maybe only £5 more a week. At the cost of constant agony and suffering the whole life of a schizophrenic patient who is told that this is good for him when it's not, and he has no recourse to object. He is just made to feel like a fool for saying the truth. So this is what we're dealing with. But people live in their bubbles and they're vain, and they ignore the suffering of others, and they think it won't happen to them. And it doesn't happen to them until it does happen to them, and then it's too late. You can see it's getting darker and darker and darker and later and later and later over the last few decades, with the extremely powerful and wealthy increasing and cementing their power more and more and more. The cost of liberties, the average citizen, and as Ray Kurzweil says, this trend is going to shoot off into infinity. So yeah, the worry about viruses, it's mostly psychological. The more you worry about it, more chance you're going to come down with it and die of it. The less psychological healthy you are, the more likely you're going to be susceptible to it. But it's fairly unlikely anyway. It's possible. But far more possible and far more likely is you being subjugated, like all the slaves were subjugated in history, by other human beings and other organisms, following the Darwinian nature of reality, attempting to harvest and eat you, dominate, subdue, destroy, devour, you before you devour them. So which is the greater threat? The greater threat is having, not even a tall dark stranger, but but Bill Gates or George Soros or one of these people, putting whatever they like in your body and in also the bodies of billions of other people. This is the concern. This is the greater threat. And it will remain a threat from here now in. A virus will come and go. Under natural circumstances, people will develop a resistance to it, and it'll come and go. As God wills. He sends us plagues, and humanity is humbled a little bit, and it reforms itself, and a few of the weak die off, and then it goes away. But if you respond in the wrong way, respond with fear, if you let Satan frighten you too much, especially in the wrong way, the reaction will then be worse than the original problem, and you will end up being, like a herd of lemmings, rushing, being driven like Jesus driving a herd of pigs off a cliff. You will be driven off the cliff. Well, not off the cliff, but you would be driven into the factory farm model of society. You'd be driven into the control grid where a few billionaires control what everybody else is, because they're putting stuff into their body. They're violating them. We're totally defenseless and vulnerable. All 9 billion of us, and we are driven, like the herd of pigs or herd of cattle, into becoming a herd of pigs or a herd of cattle, into the factory farm, when we could have stayed out, on the pastures, and enjoyed a bit more freedom, and there would have still been the occasional sickness, especially if we're not doing everything right and we're not being really godly and taking care of our health as best we should. There'll still be the occasional, imperfections, but we will still be free to roam about, to skip and to dance and to jump, and we will enjoy much better lives out on a pasture than in the tiny little factory cubicle cage, full of hormones, injected with hormones, etc., etc. And in reality, if we do it right, we won't even be eaten. We will, because we won't be at the mercy. We won't be at the mercy. If we don't go rushing into our little cages with our hormone shots into the factory farm model, filling ourselves more full of fear and cortisol, and stress and stress and stress and stress, becoming fat, bloated, saturated, filthy pores full of all this, junk, spiritual and artificial chemical junk, then we will be more resistant, both, to the viral, biological, chemical, and to the spiritual forces which seek to assail us. We resist inner Satan. We don't overreact to a problem, which just makes the problem worse. As Mordelier says, few men die of their diseases, most die of their remedies. And this is the absolute reality of mankind, and the clear empirical reality for those who care to see it over the last decades. And there's always going to be a few people who are so degenerate and sick and decadent already, they just cannot help themselves. It's going to, rush forward for these miracle drugs and cures, which probably won't do them any good anyway, but they might do them a bit of good because they're so decadent and degenerate already. They don't have the power left to heal by themselves, right? Because they are so decadent and they're the worst of the worst. They're very sick people, morally and physically. That's just a small amount. That's the margin. But these people tug the entire social body in that direction. And it's up to us, the few healthy ones, or the majority of fairly healthy ones, to resist that tug and to resist that pull. Because we can heal. And we still care about our own existence because we're not so decadent, so unhealthy, so full of sin, so unhappy, so psychologically ill. We still care about our freedom and our health and ourselves. Still have the eyes, the intelligence to discern what is really healthy and what isn't healthy, where this is heading. And so we have to resist the tug, the pull of this vanguard of complete degenerate, sick, insane, people who don't have as much interest in staying alive or staying healthy or in the wholesome ways of doing that as we do. And if we can, we try and save them as well, by trying to give them faith confidence, because that is one of the ways of true healing. It's religious. But it's true. Faith, right? Faith heals. Um, we give them faith that try and bring them and try and give them love so that they can heal too. You know. But also so they aren't so they aren't insane that they're rushing and tugging and pulling us over a cliff, over like pigs. Jesus, driving the pigs off a cliff. So they're not driving us into the factory farm model of human society. You see, if you examine human history, what you see is great advances in some areas and great progress in some areas. But these usually or always tend to be matched equally by things you don't recognize, and they're not so broadcast by the ones who control society or who are dragging us forward, for their own profit. What is not so talked about is they're usually losses which are equal to the gains. And in fact, they can be even greater than the gains. For some people, they're much greater. The losses for some people are much greater. For others, the gains outweigh the losses. Or at least temporarily. But what you will find for most people, and some more than others, but for most people, there will be losses, as well as gains, as well as for a whole society, which are not necessary losses. They are not necessary losses, but they're losses that come about through human negligence and a too one-sided and hasty emphasis on progress, an obsession with so-called progress. Although there are certain gains from technology and from science and from progress moving forward into the future, there are also losses, and those losses can be mitigated so that you have an overall much better situation for everyone by permitting some of the progress, but also recognizing where it fails and where the losses occur, and striving hard to recapitulate and mitigate the losses psychologically